It was supposed to be the safest place. Millions spent on glass walls, steel gates, armed guards. But none of it mattered when one red balloon slipped free and a 7-year-old boy crossed a velvet rope. No alarms, no warnings, just a hiss. The service gate opening by mistake. And then, in one blink, the boy was gone, pulled behind the glass, dragged into the dark. As panic exploded across the zoo, only one man moved. A soldier who knew fear when he felt it, sprinting into the tunnels, chasing a wounded monster. Somewhere in the maze of steel and concrete, a terrified child was waiting. And time was running out. Jackson Hayes had spent most of his adult life walking through war zones, where every shadow could hide death. Afghanistan, Fallujah, Somalia. He had trusted his instincts more than any man or weapon, and those instincts, the ones that had saved his life over and over, were buzzing under his skin today like a hive of angry bees. But this wasn't a war zone. It was supposed to be safe. Oak Ridge Wildlife Center had invested millions to prove it. State-of-the-art enclosures, redundant security systems, triple reinforced glass. After last month's PR disaster, when a young leopard slipped into a visitor's area, no casualties, just panic, the center was desperate to win back public trust. Today was their big chance. Family Day. Free admission, face painting, balloon animals, live music echoing between the steel and glass domes. The sun blazed down, hot and heavy, baking the scent of popcorn, cotton candy, and wet fur into the summer air. Families swarmed the paths, laughing, shouting, snapping selfies in front of the shimmering gorilla enclosures. On the raised observation deck, Tina Mallory, the center's operations director, buzzed with tightly wound energy. She moved from group to group, all polished smiles and calm reassurances, clipboard hugged to her chest like a shield. "Double security posts at all primate gates," Tina said briskly into her radio, her voice sharp and clear. "Visual checks every 15 minutes, random walkthroughs every 30. Make it look natural." Jackson stood behind her, arms crossed, sunglasses hiding the storm brewing in his eyes. "You're overthinking it, Jack," Tina said, sensing his tension. "We've run every drill. We've got this." He said nothing. His eyes flicked to the largest enclosure, Gorilla East. Inside, lounging like a living monument, was Makari. 600 pounds of raw muscle. A silverback so massive that he seemed too large for even the towering artificial cliffs behind him. His dark eyes glimmered with something cold, something ancient. Makari wasn't born in the wild. He had been ripped from his mother as a baby, battered in back-alley circuses across Eastern Europe, starved, beaten, humiliated. Only after years of international pressure was he rescued and brought here, a place meant to be his sanctuary. But scars like that don't heal, not fully, not ever. "Nothing's going to happen today," Tina said, flashing him a tight smile. "The worst is behind us." The radio on Jackson's belt crackled. "All stations status check." One by one, voices checked in. "North Gate secure. Reptile House secure. Big Cats secure. Gorilla East secure." Jackson exhaled slowly. Maybe today would pass quietly after all. He allowed himself, for just a moment, to believe it. And that was when he saw it. A bright red balloon drifting lazily on the breeze, floating higher, dancing toward the Gorilla East barrier, trailing a thin string, and a boy chasing after it. The red balloon bobbed through the humid air like a blood drop against the sky. Jackson's stomach twisted. He pushed through the crowd, fast but not panicked, trained to move without causing alarm. Families were laughing, snapping photos, eating funnel cakes. They didn't see the danger. Not yet. He spotted the boy. 7 years old, brown hair, red sneakers. No parent in sight. Eli Rodriguez, later the headlines would call him. but right now he was just a blur of motion, chasing the string through the chaos. The boy ducked under a velvet rope marked "Authorized Personnel Only," a laughable barrier against death, and skidded across the staff pathway that ran behind the Gorilla East viewing area. Too close. Way too close. Jackson slammed the side of his hand against his radio. "Kid in restricted zone. Gorilla East. I'm moving in now." A burst of static answered him, followed by Tina's voice, urgent but clipped. "All stations, maintain crowd control. Don't cause a panic, we'll lock it down. It's under control." Under control. Jackson vaulted the low fence in a heartbeat, sprinting now. His boots hammered the pavement, adrenaline detonating in his veins. Ahead, Eli reached the secondary glass, the thick barrier separating visitors from the enclosure itself. He pressed both palms against the surface, grinning at the hulking figure on the other side. Makari. The silverback towered over him, just a few feet beyond the glass, motionless except for the slow, deliberate rise and fall of his chest. They stared at each other, the boy smiling, the gorilla breathing, and then something inside the concrete walls gave a soft, hydraulic hiss. Jackson's blood went cold. He knew that sound. Everyone in the center did. The service gate. It was opening. A mistake? A malfunction? Someone had left the internal cleaning override active, a maintenance feature meant only for emergency access inside the secondary pen. In slow motion, Jackson saw the heavy glass door slide open with a groaning creak. A gap appeared, wide enough for a child, wide enough for a monster. Makari moved, not fast, not aggressive, just deliberate. In 2 massive strides, he crossed the enclosure. One arm, thick as a tree trunk, shot through the opening, hooked around Eli's tiny torso, and pulled him into the enclosure like a rag doll. The boy didn't even scream. There was no time. In one blink, he was there. In the next, he was gone. Gone behind the glass. The crowd hadn't fully processed what they had just seen. Some gasped, some froze. Mothers grabbed their children, fathers barked confused questions, cell phones started rising. And Jackson? He was already moving again. Faster, harder, mouth dry, heart hammering against his ribs like a caged animal. "Lock it down!" he shouted into his radio, his voice hoarse. "All exits, full lockdown, now!" Tina's voice crackled back, less certain now, thinner. "We're trying. Systems glitching." Glitching, the worst word Jackson could have heard. The center's polished walls, its smiling staff, the cheerful flyers promising a day in the wild, all of it had crumbled in an instant. There was no control anymore. There was only chaos, and somewhere inside the maze of concrete and steel, a wounded gorilla was holding a terrified child. The sound inside Oak Ridge Wildlife Center shifted. Gone was the cheerful buzz of a family day. Now it was screaming, raw, animalistic. Parents dragging their children by the arms, security shouting for calm, radios crackling with overlapping frantic voices. But none of it mattered to Jackson. There was only one thing in his mind now: the boy. He reached the secondary enclosure, already pulling out his override keycard. The heavy security doors had slammed shut in an automatic lockdown. Too late to stop what mattered. He slammed the keycard against the reader. Access denied. A new voice came through his earpiece. Panicked, young, one of the junior techs. "System's frozen. The lockdown's stuck. We can't open or close anything without a manual reset. We're blind." Blind and deaf and utterly helpless. Tina's voice tried to cut through the noise, but she sounded like a woman drowning. "We're working on it. We're trying. It's not supposed to..." Jackson ripped the radio from his belt and threw it across the floor, where it shattered against the concrete. No backup was coming. No magic fix. This was a free fall. He turned toward the enclosure glass, thick enough to stop bullets, and scanned desperately. No Eli, no Makari, nothing. The public-facing part of the enclosure was empty, which meant only one thing. Makari had taken the boy into the tunnels. Most zoos and wildlife centers had them. Hidden service corridors, maintenance shafts, backup feeding routes, meant for humans, not for 600-pound gorillas. But Makari had found them anyway, and now he was somewhere inside the walls. Jackson sprinted along the perimeter, scanning for the emergency maintenance hatch. It was old, half forgotten, used only once every few months for deep cleaning. And barely anyone even remembered the shaft led straight into the environmental control chambers. A twisted labyrinth of vents, darkened crawl spaces, and dead zones where cameras didn't reach. Ahead, a heavy, rusted maintenance door hanging crooked on one hinge. Open, wide open. The trail was obvious. Bloody handprints smeared along the frame. Deep gouges in the metal where Makari's massive fingers had gripped. And a single red sneaker lying abandoned at the threshold. Eli's. Jackson froze. His training screamed at him. Call for backup. Set a perimeter. Don't go in alone. But there was no time for that. If Makari was wounded, and judging by the bloody streaks, he was, he could panic. And a panicked gorilla didn't think. It reacted, and Eli wouldn't survive that reaction. Jackson drew his sidearm, a tranquilizer pistol loaded with enough sedative to drop a bull elephant, and clipped a flashlight to his belt. He took one last breath, tasting the fear on the air, thick and sour. Then he stepped inside the dark. Inside the shaft, the world collapsed into blackness. The sounds of the center, the sirens, the screams, the crying, faded into nothing. It was just Jackson, the narrow metal walls pressing close, the slosh of standing water under his boots, the stink of rust, old urine, and animal musk thick in his nose. He followed the blood trail, heart hammering like a jackhammer against his ribs. Every few steps, he'd hear something. A thud, a scrape, a soft, wet sound like breathing. And in his mind, he saw the images he didn't want to see. Makari snapping under pressure. Makari tearing the boy apart like a rag doll. Makari sinking back into the trauma he'd been stolen from years ago. Rage and terror consuming everything. Jackson wiped sweat from his brow, the flashlight jittering in his shaking hand. He couldn't afford to think like that. He couldn't afford to believe it was already too late. And yet, a part of him knew. They were running out of time. Deep in the tunnel ahead, something moved. A heavy shadow, a massive form, crouched low, rocking back and forth in the dark. Jackson raised the flashlight, raised the tranq pistol, and stepped into the unknown. The flashlight beam cut through the black, carving trembling slices into the gloom. There, a massive shape, hunched and swaying. Makari. The silverback's enormous shoulders rose and fell in slow, ragged breaths. Blood dripped from deep gashes along his flank, reopening old circus scars, torn raw in the chaos. The metal walls seemed to hum around him, claustrophobic, vibrating with the beast's pain, and in his arms, small, fragile, human, Eli. Jackson froze. The boy wasn't struggling. He wasn't crying. He wasn't even afraid. Eli just lay there, limp but breathing, his small hand resting against the thick black fur of Makari's forearm. Jackson raised his tranq pistol, finger tightening on the trigger. One shot. That was all it would take. Drop the beast, grab the boy, get out. But something in him refused. Makari wasn't hurting the boy. He was protecting him, cradling him the way a father cradles a child, as if guarding him against some invisible nightmare only he could see. Jackson slowly holstered the tranq gun. He crouched low, lowering the flashlight beam to the floor, making himself smaller, less threatening. His voice cracked the silence like a prayer. "Makari, easy, big guy. It's okay. You're safe." The silverback's head tilted. Dark, intelligent eyes locked onto Jackson's. Not with rage, not with madness, but something older. Something broken and bleeding. Recognition. Memory. Makari had lived a life where hands meant only pain, where every human face brought agony, where cages slammed and fists rained down. But this boy, this tiny fragile boy, had wandered into his world unarmed, unafraid. And Makari had made a choice, to shelter, not to destroy. A low, mournful sound rumbled from the gorilla's throat, a sound too soft, too sorrowful to belong to something so massive. And then, slowly, achingly, Makari laid Eli down, gently, tenderly. He placed the boy atop a crumpled mound of old burlap, shielding him from the cold floor. Eli stirred, a tiny whimper escaping his lips. Alive. Bruised, but alive. Jackson moved carefully, hands out, breath shallow. "Good, Makari," he whispered. "Good boy. You did good." Makari didn't move to stop him, didn't charge, didn't roar. He just backed into the shadows, step by massive step, until the dark swallowed him whole, gone. Not in violence, not in rage, in surrender. Jackson scooped Eli into his arms, the boy's small body trembling against his chest. The flashlight flickered, barely holding its beam, but it didn't matter. He had him. He had him. The walk back through the tunnel felt endless. Every step a battle against the panic screaming inside him, against the pounding certainty that something would reach out from the dark and tear them apart, but nothing did. The moment Jackson kicked the emergency hatch open and stumbled into the blinding sunlight, the world exploded around him. Paramedics rushed in. Security teams swarmed. Cameras flashed. People screamed and cried and cheered. But Jackson didn't hear any of it. He was staring back at the mouth of the tunnel, waiting, watching. Makari never emerged. And somewhere deep inside, Jackson knew he wouldn't. 3 weeks later, the Oak Ridge Wildlife Center was shut down indefinitely. Investigations were launched, lawsuits filed. Tina Mallory disappeared from public view. Eli made a full recovery. No broken bones, only a few bruises and a story no one truly believed. As for Makari, official reports listed him as missing. Some said he'd found a way into the deeper forest reserves. Some believed he had died of his wounds, hidden where no one would find him. But late at night, when the center was silent and forgotten, the few remaining staff still whispered about the sounds. A deep, low beat. The slow rhythm of something massive rocking back and forth behind the walls. A lullaby for a lost boy. A promise never broken. And in the old maintenance shaft, under a shattered emergency light, a small red balloon remained, caught on a rusted pipe, still swaying, softly, in the dark.